What if I told you that your phone has this whole secret life? One that kicks in the very moment you think you've turned it off. Well, today, we're going to dive into the pretty wild reality of what's called powered off surveillance.
Think about it. You hold down that button, the screen goes black, and you figure, okay, I'm offline, I'm disconnected. But are you, really? The answer, as we're about to find out, is a lot more complicated than you might think.
So, first things first, let's just totally tear apart this idea of the power off button. We really need to talk about what off even means anymore when it comes to that device you carry around everywhere.
Okay, so here's the absolute key takeaway. When you hit that power button, you're not actually cutting the power to the whole thing. It's more like you're just putting the main brain to sleep, The big processor and the screen, yeah, they go dark. But there's this whole collection of smaller, low-power chips that are still humming along, wide awake and waiting.
And look, this isn't just some wild theory. Back in 2021, researchers at Princeton found something that was, well, it was pretty shocking. They discovered that iPhones, even when they were supposed to be completely powered off, were still sending out these little low-energy signals. And that discovery? It just blew the doors wide open on this whole question of what our phones are really up to when we think they're just sitting there.
This whole technology is a classic double-edged sword. On one hand, it's the magic behind Apple's Find My network, which is, let's be honest, a lifesaver when you lose your phone. But there's a flip side, a much darker one. Because if a signal can help you find your phone, well, it can also help someone else find you.
Okay, so if our phones aren't really off, what in the world is keeping them awake? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, the actual hardware that makes all this sneaky, low-level communication possible.
All right, so if you could crack open your phone, you'd see it's basically a tiny city of different parts. You've got the CPU, that's the main brain we mentioned. You've got your Wi-Fi and GPS modules. But there's one other little component in there that is the real main character of our story today, and that's the baseband processor.
So what is this thing? Well, you can think of the baseband processor as basically a second, tiny little computer living inside your phone. It has one job, and one job only, to talk to cell towers. And here is the absolute kicker. It runs completely separate from your main operating system, your iOS or your Android.
The source material had this analogy that I think is just perfect for picturing this. Imagine your phone is a big house. All your apps, your photos, your operating system, that's all happening inside the main rooms of the house. But the baseband processor? It's like this secret hallway built into the walls. Your apps can't get in, but it has a direct line to the outside world, the cell network, and that door is always open.
Which, of course, brings us to the million-dollar question. If this secret hallway exists, who's using it? And more importantly, what for?
Generally, it kind of boils down to two main players. On one side, you've got governments and intelligence agencies. They're all about surveillance, gathering intel. Then on the other side, you have corporations and marketers. Their goal? It's all about data, collecting it so they can understand you better and, well, sell you stuff.
Yeah, the government side of this is some real spy movie stuff. You have these leaked programs with names like Dirtbox and Stingray. What they do is they create these fake cell towers. Your phone's baseband processor, it just sees this really strong signal and automatically connects to it to check in. And just like that, it's given away your location. And because it's talking directly to the baseband, it doesn't matter if you're in airplane mode, it still works.
Okay, now the corporate side is a little more subtle, but maybe even more powerful in some ways. See, your phone has all these motion sensors, right? The gyroscope, the accelerometer. Well, they can keep collecting data even when your phone seems to be off. And over time, the way you move, the way you walk, the way you hold your phone, it creates this unique pattern. It's called a sensor fingerprint. And with it, they can identify you without ever even needing your name.
So, with all this going on behind the scenes, you're probably asking yourself the same thing I was. Okay, so is there any way to actually disconnect? Can I find a real off switch?
So, let's look at the usual things people try to do to stop the tracking and see if any of them actually work.
All right, so what do people try? First thought, airplane mode, right? Nope, we already know the baseband doesn't care about that. Okay, what about just turning it off? Well, we know those little chips are still running. So what's next? A Faraday bag? One of those signal-blocking pouches? And this is where things get uncomfortable. Because even the best Faraday bags aren't always perfect. They can leak signals. The hard truth is, if you're carrying a modern smartphone, you just can't be 100% certain that you vanished.
The only, and I mean only, guaranteed way to stop it is something called air gap isolation. It sounds fancy, but all it means is creating a physical gap between the battery and the phone. In other words, you have to literally take the battery out. And, well, good luck doing that with pretty much any phone made in the last decade.
So that begs the question, right? Why? Why are our phones even built like this, without a real, true off switch? And it all comes down to a trade-off, a bargain we've all kind of made, maybe without even thinking about it. And that's the price of convenience.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We want our phones to turn on instantly, right? No waiting. We want those important updates to just happen in the background. We absolutely need them to be able to make an emergency call at any time. And of course, we want to be able to track it down if we lose it. Every single one of those features that we rely on, it only works because the phone never really goes to sleep.
But that convenience, it has a price tag. Every sensor, every microphone, every little chip that's designed to never sleep, each one is a potential back door. It's an open door that can be used in ways we never, ever planned for.
And this, I think, really gets to the absolute core of the issue. There's this quote in the source material that just nails it. It says, "Privacy isn't really about hiding from everyone. It's about having control, the power to choose who gets to know what about you and when they get to know it. It's all about that control."
So I'm just going to leave you with this one final question to chew on. For the sake of convenience, we've basically accepted that our devices are always kind of awake. But maybe it's time to step back and ask a really basic question. When we hit that power button, shouldn't off actually, mean off?